U.S. Department of Energy's Oak Ridge Reservation is the site of a vital national defense facility and a modern computational and scientific center. But over the years, parts of the reservation have been contaminated with radioactive and other hazardous waste. DOE has been busy cleaning up those affected areas, but much remains to be done. Citizen input is a valuable part of that effort, and DOE welcomes advice from the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board, a citizens panel that provides independent advice and recommendations on DOE's cleanup of the Oak Ridge Reservation. The board provides input on a wide range of environmental cleanup operations underway at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, Y-12 National Security Complex, and the East Tennessee Technology Park. You can be part of this important work by attending the monthly meetings of the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board. For more information, call or visit our website.
There was something that was wrong on this.
All right, everybody. Let's go ahead and get called to order. Welcome, everyone, to our first meeting officially with our new board here, so welcome everybody. I know, Dave, you've got some announcements to make relative to some new members. If you want to take care of those.
Sure. Real quickly, Jay and Laura are up in D.C. for the annual Environmental Cleanup Caucus, so that's why I'm here today. Yes, we have a few welcomes to hand out, so I'll go ahead and take care of those now. Andrea, could you raise your hand? Thank you. Andrea Browning is a human resources business partner with the Ornell Federal Credit Union. She has a master's in industrial organizational psychology. Andrea is a resident of Lenore City and is interested in civic and environmental issues. I propose we hold our applause till we get everybody introduced, so you're just gonna have to wait a second, Andrea. Amy Jones. Hi, Amy. Is the National Business Manager for InvoPEO. Did I pronounce that closely? InvoPEO, a workers' compensation and payroll service, and is also a licensed real estate agent. Amy lives in Briceville and is interested in environmental and economic development issues. Noah Keebler.
Noah's not going to be here tonight.
Noah's not here, but I'll talk about Noah anyway. Is a nuclear electronics technician with Amatech, a manufacturer of electronic devices. He is pursuing a degree in electrical engineering from Roane State. He lives in Knoxville and is interested in the environmental aspects of the board. Georgette Samaras. Hi, Georgette. Is a director of community outreach for Covenant Health. She has a master's in behavioral psychology and is also a certified mind-body instructor. Georgette lives in Clinton and is interested in environmental issues. And Robert Whitaker. Robert is currently a subsidy specialist with the Tennessee Department of Children's Services. He has a bachelor's in health science and physical education. Robert lives in Oak Ridge and has an interest in civic and business issues. And then we have a new student, Abigail Avi Duke. Avi, thank you. Is a rising senior at Oak Ridge High School and works as an assistant cheer coach for Champion Force Athletics. She is a co-founder of the school's Wildcats for Change group, which encourages nonpartisan youth participation, an officer in the Philosophy Club, and a member of the school's team for the Tennessee High School Ethics Bowl. Avi is also a member of Youth Leadership Oak Ridge through the Oak Ridge Chamber. So if we could get a round of applause for everybody. Thank you all for joining the board.
Okay, so let's go ahead and head into comments from our federal and state agencies. So Dave, we're going to keep on asking you to talk.
I'm going to pass this month so we can keep on going. Thank you.
All right, Melissa, do you have anything?
Not at this time.
Okay. Miss Connie, I think you're on the phone. Do you have anything?
No, I do not.
Thank you, ma'am. And Christoph.
Everyone, I would like to, I guess I made an announcement already at the annual meeting. I would like to board members who did not participate to announce that our office is a part of the Division of Remediation. Our director resides in Nashville. Our reactor was reassigned, took new position, is coming back to Oak Ridge as a senior advisor, focusing her time specifically on ongoing environmental cleanup and regulatory compliance activities in Oak Ridge. Since August 30th, we have a new director in Nashville, and his name is Steve Sanders. And I have a bio for Steve Sanders, and I can share later with the board.
Thank you, Christoph.
The U.S. Department of Energy's Oak Ridge Reservation is the site of a vital national defense facility and a modern computational and scientific center. But over the years, parts of the reservation have been contaminated with radioactive and other hazardous waste. DOE has been busy cleaning up those affected areas, but much remains to be done. Citizen input is a valuable part of that effort, and DOE welcomes advice from the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board, a citizens panel that provides independent advice and recommendations on DOE's cleanup of the Oak Ridge Reservation. The board provides input on a wide range of environmental cleanup operations underway at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, Y-12 National Security Complex, and the East Tennessee Technology Park. You can be part of this important work by attending the monthly meetings of the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board. For more information, call or visit our website.
Coming from Brian Henry on the Mercury treatment facility and Y-12 excess facilities. A little background on Brian. Brian was named Y-12's Portfolio Federal Project Director in 2016. In this role, he oversees all of the planning and execution for Y-12's current and upcoming cleanup projects, including all decontamination, demolition, and disposal operations. In this role, he is also leading preparations for the Mercury treatment facility and the Environmental Management Disposal Facility, two of OREM's largest and most vital near-term capital projects. Prior to his selection, Henry was OREM's Senior Project Manager for the Environmental Management Disposal Facility, and he also served as the Interim Portfolio Federal Project Director for Y-12. Before joining OREM, Brian served as the chief of the Reservation Management Branch at DOE's Oak Ridge office, and he also led its reindustrialization program. Henry has more than 20 years of federal experience working on complex facility and utility projects, including time he spent as a civilian employee for the Navy and the Air Force. He holds a bachelor's degree in electrical and computer engineering from Tennessee Technological University, and he is a licensed professional engineer in the state of Tennessee. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Shell. So I'm going to give you an update on the Outfall 200 Mercury Treatment Facility. As Shell mentioned, that's one of our key projects that will enable the future cleanup of Y-12. I'm going to see if I can get this thing to work. I'm not always successful. Oh, there you go. So this is just a slide for anyone that was at the, I think it was the March meeting that Mark Peterson talked about Mercury TD. You would have seen this slide, but it's just to put it in perspective that Mercury is not just an Oak Ridge problem. It's just not a Tennessee problem. It's not even just a United States problem. It's a global problem. And due to atmospheric deposition, mainly from coal-fired power plants throughout the country and throughout the world, there are rivers and lakes in all 50 states that have fish that are exceed the EPA recommended levels for fish, and so there are consumption advisories in all 50 states. Okay, so this is just to kind of orient you a little bit. I'm going to try my pointer. I really like the map in the back, but I'm not going to point my pointer at it because I'm afraid I'll hit somebody. But that's a better map to kind of get oriented at. This is Y-12 right here. This is Bear Creek Valley, and this is ETTP. And so we're talking about cleaning up Y-12 and mercury contamination at Y-12. Leaving Y12 is East Fort Poplar Creek, which comes out into the city and goes throughout the city of Oak Ridge. And then there's a break in the watershed divide, so Bear Creek actually goes through Bear Creek. So from here, Upper East Fork goes out through Y12 and exits there. And it exits Y12 at what's called Station 17. And so working with the regulators, we have a interim record of decision goal for the amount of mercury in the water leaving the site of 200 parts per trillion. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. We haven't been meeting that, and that's the primary purpose for the Outfall 200 mercury treatment facility, is to get the mercury in the waters leaving the site below 200 parts per trillion, with a goal of getting them below 51 parts per trillion. A secondary goal of the Outfall 200 mercury treatment facility is we know as we start cleanup, oops, I told you I wasn't very good with that. All right. There are 4 main buildings where mercury was used in the processes, and that's Beta 4, Alpha 5, and Alpha 4 that are in the west end of Y12, and we call that the west end mercury area. Alpha 2 had some prototype development work, process equipment that used mercury, so it also has some mercury contamination. The water at the site flows from west to east, so it's going out through there. And on the west end, you have a series of storm networks that basically daylight at Outfall 200. And there have been a lot of efforts over the years to reduce mercury flux leaving Y12. And when we were looking at doing another action, Outfall 200 kind of seemed like the logical place. That's where we could get most of the flux that's leaving the site from the west end mercury area. So they brought about, and there's a video, so I'm going to hit a lot of this stuff really quick because we're going to show you a video that talks through it too. But they brought about 24 million pounds of mercury to Y12 in its early days for operations. And of that, it says they can account for all but about 2 million of that. And they estimated about 700,000 of that went to the environment. About 1.3 million is unaccounted for. Part of that could be accounting errors, and then it also could be more that was lost into the soils or the sediments. But this kind of gives you a breakdown of where that went. So it's estimated about 50,000 pounds went to the air. For comparison purposes, about 50 tons of mercury goes into the air in the United States from coal-fired power plants and all the other sources. And on a global perspective, that's about 1,000 to 2,000 tons of mercury going into the air. A lot of it went out in the water, leaving the site. There were building spills, and I'll talk about Alpha 4 Coalex equipment later and some mercury removed there. And there's still some held up in process equipments. And so the mercury still, some in the buildings, some in the soils, and we do exceed the concentrations of mercury and our goal in the surface water. So we're building the treatment plant. This has been working for a long time. 3 to 5 years ago, when we were projecting when this would be up and operational, we were projecting the 20 to 21 time frame. Since that time, we had some regulatory delays, which added about a year. As we got into, and once we got a decision on what the plant looked like, it was a little more extensive. The design time took a little longer. We originally estimated the construction period to be about 3 years, and that's turned out to be 4 years. So those are some of the reasons that the operating time frame have moved from the original projections from 2020, 2021 to where it is today. So up at the headworks, that's where we're going to intercept all the water at that outfall. Basically up there, we're just going to do grit separation and then pipe it in a pipeline about 3,000 feet down to the treatment plant site. For those of you that have been at Y12, there's not a lot of open space and open area. Excuse me. So we had to split it up this way because we didn't have room up at the headworks to also build the treatment plant site. So the treatment plant site is on the east end of Y12, and the treated water, there'll be an effluent discharge into the upper East Fort Poplar Creek at that area. All right, so what does the treatment plant do? So up at the headwork site, it's about collecting the water. So the base flow of the creek is up to about 3,000 gallons per minute. So we'll collect that. We basically are building a base flow wet well that'll have pumps, and it'll have grit separation. And we're also, though, going to capture the storm flow, and those flows can get up to like 40,000 gallons per minute. So we have a much bigger wet well to capture the storm flows, and then there are pumps and grit separation. And then one of the things we negotiated with EPA and TDEC was also building a 2 million gallon storage tank so that we could capture even more of the flow right after a storm. When we were looking at the amount of flux being mobilized through the site, we determined that first flush after a really heavy rain is when a lot of the mercury comes out. So that's what we're trying to collect. And once in storm flows, we'll fill up the tank, and then we'll feed that back in when the creek goes back to normal base flows. Then we'll pipe it down to the treatment plant down here. And if any of you have ever been to a potable water treatment plant, you'll see very similar processes. You basically, we'll pump the water down there. You'll have an equalization tank, so make sure you have a steady flow of water. You'll have chemical precipitation and flocculation, and that's what gets out the solids and causes things to drop out. There'll be a clarification step to get the water clear and make the solids also drop out, and then it'll go through a big filter. So that's basically the process we're building. All right, now I'm going to play a video that'll tell it much better than I can.
The Department of Energy's Oak Ridge Office of Environmental Management is scheduled to complete cleanup at the East Tennessee Technology Park in 2020. Its next focus will be large-scale demolition at the Y-12 National Security Complex. However, Oak Ridge's cleanup program must first construct the Mercury treatment facility before that work can begin. The need for this facility dates back to Y-12's early operations. In the 1950s and 60s, Y-12 used more than 20 million pounds of mercury. During that time, approximately 700,000 pounds were lost into buildings, soils, groundwater, and sediments. The new mercury treatment facility will capture mercury that migrates from buildings and soils during major demolition. It will also help Oak Ridge's environmental management program toward meeting its regulatory limits. The facility is expected to reduce mercury concentrations in the water exiting Y-12 by 84%. Since mercury travels from west to east at Y-12, the facility will be constructed on the eastern side of the site. This location will allow the facility to capture a large percentage of the mercury before it travels off-site into the environment. The facility is being designed with the capability to treat up to 3,000 gallons per minute, and it will feature a 2 million gallon storage tank to collect stormwater. Its modular design will enable future modifications, such as adding additional stormwater storage or unit operations to achieve greater mercury reductions based on performance monitoring data. Mercury migrating from the site's mercury-contaminated area in the western portion of Y-12 will enter the headworks facility, travel through the piping, and then be treated at the Mercury Treatment Center on the eastern portion of Y-12. The treated water will then feed into the upper East Fork Poplar Creek that leaves the site. The Environmental Management Program is working to begin preparing a site for its construction in late 2017. The current schedule estimates large-scale construction in 2018 and the mercury treatment facility beginning operations in 2022. Once the facility is operational, Oak Ridge's Environmental Management Program can begin removing Y-12's large contaminated buildings and addressing mercury in the soil and groundwater beneath them.
The U.S. Department of Energy's Oak Ridge Reservation is the site of a vital national defense facility and a modern computational and scientific center. But over the years, parts of the reservation have been contaminated with radioactive and other hazardous waste. DOE has been busy cleaning up those affected areas, but much remains to be done. Citizen input is a valuable part of that effort, and DOE welcomes advice from the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board, a citizens panel that provides independent advice and recommendations on DOE's cleanup of the Oak Ridge Reservation. The board provides input on a wide range of environmental cleanup operations underway at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, Y-12 National Security Complex, and the East Tennessee Technology Park. You can be part of this important work by attending the monthly meetings of the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board. For more information, call or visit our website.
So I mentioned the interim ROD goal of 200 parts per trillion, and then there's a state recreational ambient water quality criteria of 51 parts per million. That's really about getting the concentrations of water down low enough so that the fish don't accumulate mercury. That's what that's based on. I think it's important for perspective to understand that the amount of mercury in water and the safety of the amount of mercury is relative to what the use of the water is for. For instance, the federal drinking water standard is 2,000 parts per trillion, and by federal law, this bottle of water here could have up to 2,000 parts per trillion of water in it. I'm sure it doesn't, but it could. For continuous discharge for aquatic life, that means the fish and the critters are happy and living, but you're not eating them. To get to where you can eat them, that's this 51 parts per trillion. So that's just a little bit of perspective on the different protective levels. All right. So a lot of activity has occurred on the Outfall 200 Mercury Treatment Facility site. We did what we call early site preparation starting in December of 2017. And what we did there was do some early demolition and bring utilities to the boundary of the site and get the site really ready for the construction contractor. One of the challenges of working out at Y-12 is it has a vital national security mission, but it's also highly secure. So any of the work we're doing out there creates challenges. And Y-12, the mission owns the site, they own the utilities, they own all the infrastructure, and their priority is going to be that national security mission. And oh, by the way, this thing called the uranium processing facility, a $6 billion project, is also under construction. So there's a lot of competition for resources, so we wanted kind of to get ahead of that. And so we started early site preparation activities in December 2017, and we finished those in January of this year, in 2019. And that coincided with the award of our construction contract, and that was awarded in December of 2018. And that has a 4-year performance period. Aptum Northwind Construction is the contractor that basically got the award. And they're actively out there at the site working. This is the treatment plant site. They've done the demolition. There was a parking lot there. There was a building slab for the treatment plant site footprint. Those are all gone. Out at the headwork site, this picture is actually dated. Some people may belabor or bemoan the fact that we're having 90-plus degree days in September. I'm actually liking that because it is really good for a construction project, because one of our challenges up at the headwork site is we're doing excavations for those wet wells 30 to 40 feet below grade. And so, dry conditions are actually good for us in getting that work done. I mentioned the high security posture at Y-12. Because of that, If you've ever been there, you can't take pictures. They have to have people take photographs and they have to be screened. So these are more out of date than if I could have just walked out and took a picture. But the excavation in this area is probably already 20 feet below grade in that area. And our plan is to get the excavation at Headworks site done by November so that we can start installation of concrete, because people who lived in East Tennessee, the winter here is a wet season typically, and it's not really good for construction activities. So we're trying to get ahead of that. So I mentioned earlier some of the reasons that the operational date has shifted from 2020 and 2021 to where it is today. When we do a project and we actually have, through DOE, we actually have to get a baseline for a project, a total project cost, and a project schedule. When we go through that rigorous process, once the design is complete, we identify risk and identify a schedule contingency, and then basically we sign up with DOE and with Congress on when we're going to have this project done by and for what cost are we going to have it done by. So when all that schedule contingency and everything is factored in, this is DOE's commitment, is to have this project complete by the end of September 2025. Now, that baseline was based on a funding profile that basically caused us to delay activities and spread out the construction because we didn't have enough money to just go all the way through the construction. Thankfully, Congress has actually given us a plus up in 19 and potentially a plus up in 20. So we are funded well enough now that we don't have to slow down and stretch out due to funding. So we are not funding constrained on the project anymore. And because of that, even when factoring in contingency, I estimate completion in the June 2024 timeframe. Now, could it be done sooner? That's possible. So as I mentioned before, the end of the construction contract ends December 2022. Once the facility is constructed, then we have startup, operational testing, and all that kind of stuff, and that's about 6 months. So if we don't realize a lot of risk, if our contractor performs better than what we have baselined, we could be up and operational late December, early 2023. I would say early finish date, if I were projecting, is mid-2023 for a reasonable early finish date. The likely finish date is more like mid-2024. But if we keep getting good weather and we get good performance out of our contractor, then we could be up sooner. All right. Now I'm switching gears a little bit. I think you heard on one of the recent presentations about risk reduction at ORNL, so I'm adding risk reduction activities for Y12 at the end of this presentation. And one of the big things we did was some risk reduction activities at West Coalex equipment, and this is outside of Alpha 4, which is one of the Mercury use buildings. And this kind of shows what it looks like before we started. You had a lot of equipment out there that was rusting, and we actually have removed from the west side more than 3.5 tons of mercury. And some of that waste we sent off to be treated, and we'll get back about another 0.5 ton of mercury from that process. So from the west side of Coalex and that risk reduction activity, basically we've gotten 4 tons of mercury out in safe storage that can't get into the environment. This is what it looked like after. For reference, these blue doors right down here, those are man doors. That gives you an idea of the size. It's hard to appreciate the size of some of these facilities unless you're actually out there and standing. But imagine you're standing, a person is standing right there at one of those doors. That gives you an idea of the scale of the project. We had a lot of challenges on the West Coalex equipment project. We found a lot of mercury. It was hard to remove. One of the big challenges is your exposure of your workers to mercury vapors. And so we had to implement a lot of controls, and after that, we looked back and said, okay, how can we do this a little bit more efficiently and reduce the exposure to workers? So we did some demonstration activities, taking some of the piping from interior Coalex equipment and from the East Coalex equipment, and we tried some mechanical reaming, pulling pipe plugs through the pipes, and some CO2 blasting. I think before we went into the demonstrations, some people thought that the pressurized CO2 blasting might be the most effective, turned out not to be very effective. The pipe reaming and pulling the pipe lugs in combination, we actually saw better results than what we anticipated. So moving forward, we'll try to implement those lessons from those demonstrations. Now, another key thing we did is after we removed all of that equipment, we actually installed a geomembrane liner in that footprint to prevent rainwater and infiltration through the soils in that area. Because around these buildings, we know there's mercury in the soils, and rainwater getting into that system can carry mercury into the creek and out into the city. So that was another thing we did. I'm going to do that at least one more time. So this is a building, and those are soils that were removed decades ago as part of the disposal area remedial action. And they built a facility and put these soils in there to let them dry out. And then they collected all the leachate from that and treated it because the soils came from an old pond where hazardous waste were dumped in the Bear Creek Burial Grounds area. So our estimates for sending those soils is about 4,000 cubic yards off-site for treatment and disposal was more than $70 million. They've been sitting there a long time, and we felt it was a good idea to go in and recharacterize them. Once we did that, we worked with EPA and TDEC because what we found was that the majority of the soils were no longer hazardous. There was just a small quantity that basically met the definition of characteristic hazardous waste. So we were able to take the majority of those soils and ship them to our on-site disposal facility, and then only about 20 cubic yards actually went out to the NNSS disposal area out in Nevada. And I should remember what NNSS stands for, but I don't at the moment. So that was a very successful project, and that's what the building looked like after it was emptied. It's not quite empty there, but the trucks and the heavy equipment actually, that's big enough. It was built below grade to drive the trucks down in and have the heavy equipment down inside that building. And we're looking for reuse opportunities for that building now. The biology buildings, that's a big project that we have going on right now. Congress started giving us excess contaminated facilities risk reduction monies in FY16. So we did characterization of biology complex with those monies. In FY18, Congress gave us $125 million to fully fund taking those buildings down and cleaning up the soils. So we're in the midst of the deactivation and decontamination phase of the biology complex. And this gives you some pictures of how bad buildings look when you don't fix the roof and you let water start coming in and infiltrating. You get horrible conditions. So even in 16, when we put workers in there to do the characterization, everybody had to be dressed out and everybody had to be in a respirator, which adds significantly to the amount of time it takes and the cost to do the deactivation work. And the deactivation work is really about universal waste hazard removal, and asbestos abatement and abatement of other hazards. That typically takes about 70% of your time in taking a building to the point of demolition and about 70% of your cost. So we should finish up, like I said, you've got some pictures here of the before. Here's the area after they've done the universal waste cleanup, and we're projecting to remove several thousand cubic yards of asbestos from these facilities because it's everywhere. We're removing about 50 cubic yards a week. Universal hazardous waste, we're removing 5 to 10 cubic yards a week, and we'll remove up to about 100 cubic yards of universal hazardous waste. And I think that's it, except for the big question mark.
Thank you, Brian. Does any of our board members have a question? Yes, Rudy.
Yes, sir. At one time, there were some sludge pits by the Alpha 4 and some of the other facilities back there, and they were sludge, but they also contained a copious amounts of mercury. Have those been cleaned up and filled in, or do you know the status of those sludge pits right now?
I'm not aware of sludge pits. Dave?
Well, there were sumps.
Or sumps. Well, it wasn't a sump per se. It was actually a sludge pit not inside a building. So it was on the outside, and
So I'm aware of the 8110 area where they, did retort and some problems there.
yeah, the sludge pits were below grade, and at one time there was a project to remove the sludge, and basically, because of the mercury, once they got in there and started messing around, the levels of mercury went high enough that they couldn't get in there with just a full-face respirator. They would have had to be in a level A or B, and I was just wondering, have those things been remediated and filled in?
I will check on that. The area I know of is the Alpha 2 basement, which has some challenges in mercury, and there's a sump in the basement of that building, and there's an area outside of Alpha 2. There's a Big Springs water treatment plant where they basically collect groundwater and treat it. I'll have to check on the sludge pits. I'm not aware of those.
Okay.
But I will. If they're there, I'll find them. So.
Okay, thank you.
Nanon?
Yeah, I was wondering with the treatment facility, does that discriminate based on methylation state at all? So that 84%, does that apply equally?
So we do have some data on the characteristics of the mercury in Upper East Fort Poplar Creek, and it's almost entirely elemental mercury. So within Y12 and in the upper reaches outside the main plant, you're primarily dealing with elemental mercury. As we get further down the creek, that's where you start seeing more methyl mercury, and at the Lower East Fort Poplar Creek are the highest levels of methyl mercury. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but.
All right, thanks. And remind me what happens to the mercury after capture?
So what you're basically doing is removing the solids out of the water. So you basically take that, it'll be turned into a sludge and it'll be dried. We're talking about parts per trillion in the water. We estimate by the time it's consolidated in the sludge, it'll be in the parts per million and should not be characteristically hazardous waste. And it should be, the dried sludge should be able to go in our permanent landfills.
Thank you.
Fred?
Are there any commercial outlets for the mercury that can be easily captured? In other words, can you sell it for any use?
Well, so right now there's a mercury export ban, and there are more than 1,200 metric tons of very clean mercury stored at Y12. So I think they, when they were dispositioning all the excess inventory of mercury at Y12, I think they explored and sent a lot off to commercial uses. But I think right now there's a lot of mercury that is just being stored. And there's actually an effort to create a storage place for mercury that comes from these retort facilities that's 99.5% pure. And so that should be up and running in the near term. And folks that have mercury just stored, we'll be able to send it to a central repository.
Miss Harriet?
I want to take that one step further. Where is such a repository?
I'm not sure where the status of that is in establishment and public information, or whether it's still in the procurement stage. So anything that I think may be in a procurement stage, I try to stay away from. So let me check on that.
Translate procurement stage.
Okay, so when they're doing contracts to set up, so when they're setting up a contract for a specific scope of work or something, then there's what's called source selection sensitive information. And so there's not a lot of details that are available to the public until that contract's actually been awarded. And so I need to, before I say, I need to make sure it's past the stage that it's public information.
I might be able to add one thing. My recollection is that the legislation from Congress that told DOE to find a mercury storage facility, which I believe was authored by Senator Alexander, specifically said that Oak Ridge would not be it.
That's correct. That is correct.
Yeah. So Oak Ridge may end up being a storage location for its own mercury, but it would not be the repository for the nation's supplies of mercury.
And actually, we're looking now at when we would be able to ship our mercury to that central repository that we are collecting. So ideally, once it's open, we no longer store mercury we get back from retort or we collect. It goes to that repository.
We have a couple of board members joining via phone this evening, so I want to give them an opportunity to ask any questions if they have any. Leon or Sarah? Okay. Members of the public or guests, does anyone have a question for Brian?
No, I do not. Thank you.
Is this ready? Am I recognized? Luther Gibson, I'm a board member of the board. Before this meeting, I reviewed an action memorandum that was written in 2010 for Y12 facilities, non-time critical removal action, deactivation, demolition project. And it has a lot more access facilities listed in it than you have talked about tonight. Are those facilities in that document? I'm sure you're familiar with it. Are they truly access facilities that you're talking about here in this presentation?
So, yeah, there are a lot of excess contaminated facilities, both at Y12 and ORNL, and that there's not currently enough funds to go out and address those. So those are part of our life cycle baseline planning for the cleanup of Y12 and Oak Ridge that will stretch out over the next several decades. But there are a number of facilities. We've been fortunate enough that Congress has been giving us plus-up funding, and that may hold true again in FY20. If that does hold true, then we'll be able to move from these facilities to additional facilities at Y12.
Okay, I just want to ask about one in particular, the depleted oxide storage vault. Mm-hmm. It's got material in it that it's in solidified mass. Perhaps could, be power forward or reactive if it was disturbed. It's thought to be pretty stable. Did you consider it for an early risk reduction activity?
I am aware of the facility you're talking about. The risk of that facility didn't rise to the same risk as some of the other facilities, but it is on our radar, and we do evaluate it.
Rudy?
Just as a FYI for some of the new members, the oil land farm facility, the material that was collected wasn't just put down on more soil. There was a concrete slab there. And
a liner system.
In a liner, and at the low end, there was a leachate collection system.
That's correct.
And so, that material was actually contained within a facility, and with the rub tent over it, there was no way you could get any rainwater in there, and that's why it was allowed to dry out so well.
Yeah, that was a good remedy. I wasn't involved in it, but I'm glad to sweep up the tail end of it. Right.
Any other questions? Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Brian. The public comment period is now open. I believe, Luther, you have a comment. Please state your full name and keep your comment to 3 minutes.
Luther Gibson, I was a member of the board from 1999 to 2005, board chair 2001, 2002. Well, thinking about something to say about at this meeting, I ran across a fall 2001 issue of EM Progress that was published by the DOE Office of Environmental Management. And on page 9, there was an article entitled Students Get Real-World Experience Serving on SSABs. At that time, Oak Ridge was the only board to have student representatives. And in the article, Rod Nelson, then DOE Oak Ridge Assistant Manager for EM, expressed his appreciation for their participation. And Steve Kopp, who preceded me as chair, led a committee that spearheaded efforts to bring students into the board. And he also comments in that article. And as chair, I got to sum it up with a quote that's saying, "The legacy of DOE activities on the Oak Ridge Reservation will be with us for a long, long time. So it's crucial that the next generation, as well as those that follow, be informed, active participants in remediation decision-making. We owe it to them to teach them, and they owe it to themselves to take responsibility for the world they are about to inherit." So, Abby, when the year concludes, you'll be ready to go out and do good things. Thank you.
Thank you, Luther. Much appreciated. Are there any other members of the public who would like to make a comment? As a Citizens Advisory Board to the Department of Energy on environmental cleanup, we encourage the community to attend and participate in our meetings. If you are unable to attend, you may send questions and comments to the address shown. Appropriate submissions will be read during the public comment period of an ORSSAB meeting and will be given the same consideration as those given in person. Meeting schedules and ways to communicate with the board can be obtained by calling 865-241-4583 or by visiting our website. At this time, I'd like to make any calls or requests for new action items. Our next meeting is Wednesday, October the 9th, and our presentation that evening will be Processing of Uranium-233 by Bill McMillan. Our issue group is not yet determined for U-233, so if you'd like to be engaged, please email the staff. This ends the presentation portion of the meeting. Presenters and subject experts may depart. Members of the public, you're welcome to stay if you'd like.
The U.S. Department of Energy's Oak Ridge Reservation is the site of a vital national defense facility and a modern computational and scientific center. But over the years, parts of the reservation have been contaminated with radioactive and other hazardous waste. DOE has been busy cleaning up those affected areas, but much remains to be done. Citizen input is a valuable part of that effort, and DOE welcomes advice from the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board, a citizens panel that provides independent advice and recommendations on DOE's cleanup of the Oak Ridge Reservation. The board provides input on a wide range of environmental cleanup operations underway at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, Y-12 National Security Complex, and the East Tennessee Technology Park. You can be part of this important work by attending the monthly meetings of the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board. For more information, call or visit our website.
At this point, I'll hand things over to Miss Melissa to talk about our work plan.
Yes, we just had our annual planning meeting on August, I think it was 24th. So we came up with the topics that the TDAC, EPA, and DOE presented, and I've now put together the draft copy of the work plan. This should be in their packages, correct? It's in your packages. The key that I really want you to focus on is the one for October, the processing of U-233. The reason I want you to focus on it is because we need to get an issue group together for that presentation. So that's the one that we need you to let staff know as quickly as possible so that we can get that taken care of. What we will do is in this column called issue group, we will list those people at each of the topics. So that way we'll be able to look through the work plan over the next year and see who is signed up for each one of them. We'd like for you to sign up for at least one issue group. I recommend two so that you can sit through one as just kind of understanding what they do as the issue group so that you'll be ready to participate more for another one. But you're welcome to sign up for as many as you want to sign up for. Also, I just wanted to say that you did have your budget recommendation has come into DOE, and we're currently in the middle of processing that, which means sending it up to EM headquarters, and you should be getting a response shortly back from us saying that we have received it. Are there any questions on the work plan that I can answer? So understand right now, this is a draft. It's going, it may change some during the year. If things came up that maybe we need to move things around, we might do that. But we like to at least lay out so you kind of know where we're going. What will happen with this draft, it will become part of your official work plan. And Dave, as our Deputy Designated Federal Officer, and Shell, who is our new chairman. And I am so sorry, I should have said that. I want to congratulate our new members that will start in October. We have Shell, who is our new chair, Leon is our new vice chair, and Bonnie is our secretary. So they will be taking over in October. Shell got an early taste of it because Dennis couldn't be here the day. So Shell and Dave will both sign off on the work plan. But if you have like any questions or comments, we do like to get the issue members in there before we put it in the work plan. Just because you're in an issue group, after the work plan is signed, if you want to change, it's a working document. We constantly change this part of the package as people want to move to different issue groups, or if we have to change the order of a presentation or something like that. So take this back. Take your time to look at it, figure out what you would like to get involved in, and just let the staff know so we can put you on that group. Now, I will let you know the group, what we're going to start also doing is a little bit different. With the issue group, once we have an established group, we are going to send out an email chain that gets that group of people together on email, and then we will probably meet a few minutes early, like maybe 10 minutes early before the initial presentation, just so you can kind of see who's on the group, see if anybody in the group already has some thoughts of what they want to look at, because we're going to try to help you process through doing your recommendations a little bit easier. And if you can get started at the presentation and there's questions you need to know at that point so that you can formulate your recommendation, it'll kind of help you get something put together a little bit easier.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Next up for committee reports, for EM stewardship, Leon is on travel today. Our most recent EM meeting, I believe, was in June, so it's been quite a while. And we discussed the 2020 budget recommendation, which, as Melissa just articulated, has been received by DOE, so we should be receiving acknowledgement of that. I do want to thank everyone who participated in that discussion, not only in person, but also the ensuing email. There was a whole lot of it. But everybody played well in the sandbox, so that was really awesome. Thank you all for that. On the executive committee meeting, this last meeting, which was August the 7th, we did recap the annual meeting, including a review of some of the survey information that was provided by everyone. Do want to thank everyone who took the survey. In general, the comments were very positive about the meeting, as well as the meeting facilities, and I believe for the dinner as well, although that wasn't expressly asked in the survey, we did receive a lot of really nice comments about that. We also discussed the FY 2020 work plan. Melissa gave us a draft of that, which you all now have. And we talked a bit about the upcoming plan relative to how we were going to get the team together for the issue groups a little bit ahead of time, as Melissa just shared as well. And we'll actually be staying a little bit later this afternoon, or this evening rather, to talk a little bit with the issue group for Mercury, just to kind of set the stage for that as well. And
Madam Chair, if I could add just one point to that EM stewardship, if you'd allow me.
Go ahead, Leon.
If anyone has an interest in serving as chair or vice chair for that EM stewardship, please make sure and get with Ms. Shelley and give your intent for that. They can still nominate from the floor, but the next meeting that we have, remember, that'll be the elections for those two positions.
Thank you, Leon. Any additions to the agenda or closing remarks from anyone? Melissa was kind enough to introduce the officers, which was great, so I didn't have to introduce myself. I appreciate that. And for those of you that can stay, that are on the Mercury Treatment Facility Issue Group, Browning, Zhang, Jones, Perez, Shields, Shoemaker, Swindler, and Weigel, we can chat a few minutes here at the end to talk a little bit about how we want to tackle that work. With that, I'll thank everyone. We're adjourned.
The Department of Energy's Oak Ridge Office of Environmental Management is scheduled to complete cleanup at the East Tennessee Technology Park in 2020. Its next focus will be large-scale demolition at the Y-12 National Security Complex. However, Oak Ridge's cleanup program must first construct the Mercury treatment facility before that work can begin. The need for this facility dates back to Y-12's early operations. In the 1950s and 60s, Y-12 used more than 20 million pounds of mercury. During that time, approximately 700,000 pounds were lost into buildings, soils, groundwater, and sediments. The new mercury treatment facility will capture mercury that migrates from buildings and soils during major demolition. It will also help Oak Ridge's environmental management program toward meeting its regulatory limits. The facility is expected to reduce mercury concentrations in the water exiting Y12 by 84%. Since mercury travels from west to east at Y12, the facility will be constructed on the eastern side of the site. This location will allow the facility to capture a large percentage of the mercury before it travels off-site into the environment. The facility is being designed with the capability to treat up to 3,000 gallons per minute, and it will feature a 2 million gallon storage tank to collect stormwater. Its modular design will enable future modifications, such as adding additional stormwater storage or unit operations to achieve greater mercury reductions based on performance monitoring data. Mercury migrating from the site's mercury-contaminated area in the western portion of Y12 will enter the headworks facility, travel through the piping, and then be treated at the Mercury Treatment Center on the eastern portion of Y12. The treated water will then feed into the upper East Fork Poplar Creek that leaves the site. The Environmental Management Program is working to begin preparing a site for its construction in late 2017. The current schedule estimates large-scale construction in 2018 and the mercury treatment facility beginning operations in 2022. Once the facility is operational, Oak Ridge's Environmental Management Program can begin removing Y12's large contaminated buildings and addressing mercury in the soil and groundwater beneath them.
The U.S. Department of Energy's Oak Ridge Reservation is the site of a vital national defense facility and a modern computational and scientific center. But over the years, parts of the reservation have been contaminated with radioactive and other hazardous waste. DOE has been busy cleaning up those affected areas, but much remains to be done. Citizen input is a valuable part of that effort, and DOE welcomes advice from the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board, a citizens panel that provides independent advice and recommendations on DOE's cleanup of the Oak Ridge Reservation. The board provides input on a wide range of environmental cleanup operations underway at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, Y12 National Security Complex, and the East Tennessee Technology Park. You can be part of this important work by attending the monthly meetings of the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board. For more information, call or visit our website.